Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are once again going to be continuing to read Homer's Iliad. So, let's get going. Meanwhile, his conquest ravished from his eyes, the raging chief in chase of Venus flies. No goddess she commissioned to the field, like Pallas dreadful with her sable shield, or fierce Bellona thundering at the wall, while flames ascend and mighty ruins fall. He knew soft combats suit the tender dame, new to the field and still a foe to fame. Through breaking ranks his furious course he bends, and at the goddess his broad lance extends. Through her bright veil the daring weapon drove, the ambrosial veil which all the graces wove. Her snowy hand the razing steel profaned, and the transparent skin with crimson stained. From the clear vein a stream immortal flowed, such stream as issues from a wounded god. 148. Pure emanation, uncorrupted flood, unlike our gross diseased terrestrial blood. For not the bread of man their life sustains, nor wine's inflaming juice supplies their veins. With tender shrieks the goddess filled the place, and dropped her offspring from her weak embrace. Him Phoebus took, he casts a cloud around the fainting chief, and wards the mortal wound. Then with a voice that shook the vaulted skies, the king insults the goddess as she flies. Ill with Jove's daughter bloody fights agree, the field of combat is no scene for thee. Go let thy own soft sex employ thy care, go lull the coward, or delude the fair. Taught by this stroke renounce the war's alarms, and learn to tremble at the name of arms. Tydides thus the goddess seized with dread, confused, distracted from the conflict fled. To aid her swift the winged Iris flew, wrapped in a mist above the warring crew. The queen of love with faded charms she found, pale was her cheek, and livid looked the wound. To Mars who sat remote they bent their way, far on the left with clouds involved he lay. Beside him stood his lance distained with gore, and reined with gold his foaming steeds before. Low at his knee she begged with streaming eyes her brother's car to mount the distant skies, and showed the wound by fierce Tydides given, a mortal man who dares encounter heaven. Stern Mars attentive hears the queen complain, and to her hand commits the golden rein. She mounts the seat, oppressed with silent woe, driven by the goddess of the painted bow. The lash resounds, the rapid chariot flies, and in a moment scales the lofty skies. They stopped the car, and there the coursers stood, fed by fair Iris with ambrosial food. Before her mother love's bright queen appears, o'erwhelmed with anguish and dissolved in tears. She raised her in her arms, beheld her bleed, and asked what god had wrought this guilty deed. Venus wounded in the hand, conducted by Iris to Mars. Then she, this insult from no god I found, an impious mortal gave the daring wound. Behold the deed of haughty Diomed, 'twas in the son's defence the mother bled. The war with Troy no more the Grecians wage, but with the gods, the immortal gods, engage. Dione, then, thy wrongs with patience bear, and share those griefs inferior powers must share. Unnumbered woes mankind from us sustain, and men with woes afflict the gods again. The mighty Mars in mortal fetters bound, 149, and lodged in brazen dungeons underground. Full 13 moons imprisoned roared in vain. Otis and Iphialtes, I think, held the chain. perhaps had perished had not Hermes' care restored the groaning god to upper air. Great Juno's self has borne her weight of pain, the imperial partner of the heavenly reign. Amphitryon's son infixed the deadly dart, 150, and filled with anguish her immortal heart. E'en hell's grim king Alcides' power confessed. The shaft found entrance in his iron breast. To Jove's high place for a cure he fled, pierced in his own dominions of the dead, where Paeon, sprinkling heavenly balm around, assuaged the glowing pangs and closed the wound. Rash impious man, to stain the blessed abodes, and drench his arrows in the blood of gods. Otus and Ephialtes, holding Mars captive. But thou, though Pallas urged thy frantic deed, whose spear ill-fated makes a goddess bleed, know thou whoe'er with heavenly power contends, short is his date, and soon his glory ends. From fields of death, when late he shall retire, no infant on his knees shall call him sire. Strong as thou art, some god may yet be found, to stretch thee pale and gasping on the ground. Thy distant wife, I do not know how to pronounce that. Kiale? I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm afraid. The fair, 151. Starting from sleep with a distracted air, shall rouse thy slaves and her lost lord deplore, the brave, the great, the glorious now no more. This said, she wiped from Venus's wounded palm the sacred ichor and infused the balm. Juno and Pallas with a smile surveyed, and thus to Jove began the blue-eyed maid. Permit thy daughter, gracious Jove, to tell how the mischance the Cyprian queen befell. As late she tried with passion to inflame the tender bosom of a Grecian dame, allured the fair with moving thoughts of joy, to quit her country for some youth of Troy. The clasping zone with golden buckles bound, raised her soft hand with this lamented wound. The sire of gods and men superior smiled, and calling Venus thus addressed his child. Not these, O daughter, are thy proper cares, thee milder arts befit and softer wars. Excuse me. Sweet smiles are thine, and kind endearing charms. To Mars and Pallas leave the deeds of arms. Thus they in heaven, while on the plain below the fierce Tydides charged his Dardan foe, flushed with celestial blood pursued his way, and fearless dared the threatening god of day. Already in his hopes he saw him killed, though screened behind Apollo's mighty shield. Thrice rushing furious at the chief he struck, his blazing buckler thrice Apollo shook. He tried the fourth, when breaking from the cloud, a more than mortal voice was heard aloud. O son of Tydeus, cease, be wise and see how vast the difference of the gods and thee. Distance immense between the powers that shine above, eternal, deathless, and divine, and mortal man, a wretch of humble birth, a short-lived reptile in the dust of earth. Let's just quickly have a look. Okay, we do have time. So spoke the god who darts celestial fires. He dreads his fury and some steps retires. Then Phoebus bore the chief of Venus' race to Troy's high fane and to his holy place. Latona there and Phoebe healed the wound, with vigour armed him and with glory crowned. This done, the patron of the silver bow a phantom raised, the same in shape and show. With great Caeneus such the form he bore, and such in fight the radiant arms he wore. Around the spectre bloody wars were waged, and Greece and Troy with clashing shields engaged. Meantime on Ilion's tower Apollo stood, and calling Mars thus urged the raging god: Stern power of arms, by whom the mighty fall, who bathest in blood and shakest the embattled wall, rise in thy wrath to hell's abhorred abodes, dispatch yon Greek and vindicate the gods. First rosy Venus felt his brutal rage, me next he charged, and dares all heaven engage. The wretch would brave high heaven's immortal sire, his triple thunder and his bolts of fire. And with that we come to the end of the episode. So I will say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.